"Tomorrow morning," Wyatt said, like he was reminding me about a meeting instead of ending my career. 9 o'clock. Put the resignation on Garland's desk and walk away clean. The parking garage swallowed his voice and threw it back at me. It was late enough that the entire level felt abandoned. Concrete pillars, low yellow lights, my sedan sitting alone near the back row. I had just unlocked the driver's door when I heard footsteps behind me. Measured, deliberate, too confident to belong to someone passing through. Then Wyatt stepped into view. Burke moved in a second later, slower, quieter, taking the other side of my car like this had been rehearsed. That was the first thing that told me this wasn't spontaneous. The second was how calm they both looked. Wyatt was big enough to make any space feel smaller, all sharp tailoring stretched over an athlete's frame. Burke looked softer at first glance. Glasses, careful posture, that permanently reasonable expression. But I'd been around both men long enough to know which one usually did the real damage. "Working late again?" Burke asked. His tone was gentle, in the way a knife can look harmless from across the room. I kept my grip on my keys and didn't answer right away. My heart had already started pounding, but I wasn't about to let either of them see it. "What do you want?" Wyatt's smile disappeared. "We know what you've been doing." Burke tilted his head. "Talking to people, asking questions, looking into things outside your lane." There it was. Not confusion, not concern, a warning. I looked from one man to the other and forced my voice to stay level. "I do my job thoroughly." Burke gave a soft laugh, like I'd said something cute. "Your job is whatever this company needs it to be. And right now," Wyatt said, "your job is to resign." He said it flatly, no build-up, no soft landing. For a second, the garage seemed to go completely still. I was 36 years old, and I'd spent most of my adult life learning how power dressed itself up in nicer language. Men like Wyatt called it leadership. Men like Burke called it strategy. But when they thought you were trapped, they stopped pretending. "We put together a strong separation package," Burke said. "You sign it, you leave quietly, and this gets easier for everyone." "And if I don't?" I asked. Wyatt folded his arms. "Then we do this the hard way." Burke took one step closer. "Performance issues, behavioral concerns, documentation, enough to make your next employer pause before they touch your resume." I felt the blood drain from my face, though I kept my expression still. Then Wyatt added, almost casually, "And those accounting issues you've been circling? Funny thing, your access appears all over the system." That landed exactly the way he meant it to. Not because I believed them, because I knew they'd been preparing this long before tonight. I had seen enough in the last 3 years to recognize a pattern. Missing details, altered records, concerns erased from official conversations, smiles in meetings, threats in private. They liked people who were useful, quiet, and easy to bury later. And lately, I had stopped being quiet. "We need your answer now," Burke said. I said nothing. Wyatt studied me for a moment, then played the card he thought would finish it. "You have people depending on you, Marlowe." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Your mother's treatments, your sister's tuition. It would be a shame to let pride cost them both. That was the moment something inside me went cold, not hot. Cold, because now I understood exactly how far they'd gone. They hadn't just looked into my work, they had looked into my life. I let a few seconds pass. Then I lifted my eyes to his. "My name is Marlowe Arden," I said quietly. "And if you two had spent half as much time understanding me as you did planning this, you would have known threats don't work as well as you think." Wyatt's jaw tightened. Burke smiled, but it slipped at the edges. "You're not in a position to be difficult." I looked at both of them, and to my own surprise, smiled. "There's a third option." For the first time that night, neither of them spoke. It lasted maybe a second. Then Wyatt stepped back. 9 a.m., he said again. They turned and walked away like the conversation was over. their polished shoes clicking across the concrete, certain they had already decided what happened next. I sat in my car for a long time after they disappeared. Then I picked up my phone and sent one message. They finally made their move. Be ready. And that was the moment everything started. The message showed as delivered almost instantly. No reply. Good. I didn't need reassurance. I needed timing. I leaned back in the driver's seat, hands still wrapped around the steering wheel, feeling the aftershock of what had just happened ripple through my body. Not fear exactly. Not anymore. Recognition. Because nothing they said tonight was new. Not really. It was just the first time they stopped pretending. 3 years inside that company had taught me one thing very clearly. People like Wyatt and Burke didn't improvise. They built systems. Quiet ones. Invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. And for a long time, I hadn't been. Not at first. When I joined, the job looked clean, structured, competitive, but predictable. The kind of place where performance still meant something, where numbers told the truth. That illusion didn't last long. 6 months in, I started noticing small inconsistencies, reports that didn't quite line up with what I remembered reviewing, decisions that got recorded differently than they were discussed, people who raised concerns and then disappeared from meetings a few weeks later. At first, I told myself it was normal. Corporate friction, miscommunication. Then I started paying attention. Wyatt handled the room, always had. He knew exactly when to smile, when to joke, when to lean in just enough to make someone feel seen. The board loved him. You could feel it in the way conversation shifted when he spoke. Burke was the one who made everything stick. He controlled the data, the structure, the story behind the numbers. If Wyatt built trust, Burke built justification. Together, they didn't just make decisions. They made those decisions look inevitable. And anyone who questioned that didn't last. I saw it happen over and over again. Mid-level managers with solid track records suddenly labeled difficult. Department leads quietly reassigned. One guy from operations, sharp, experienced, raised concerns about equipment maintenance during a quarterly review. 2 months later, he was gone. No explanation, just gone. I learned fast. Do the work. Do it well, but don't make noise. For a while, that kept me safe. Then Project Revival started. It was announced like a rescue plan. Big initiative. Aggressive targets. The kind of thing companies roll out when they need to show momentum fast. I remember the first meeting. Wyatt stood at the front of the room, outlining cost reduction goals that sounded impressive until you actually ran the numbers behind them. They didn't just require efficiency, they required sacrifice. We need immediate impact, Burke said when I suggested a phased approach. Not theoretical improvements. Speed matters more than perfection right now, Wyatt added, already moving the conversation forward. That became the pattern. Cut here, delay that. Replace experienced staff with cheaper alternatives. Push maintenance timelines just far enough that it didn't immediately break anything. Every suggestion framed as necessary. Every concern redirected. I started documenting things after the 3rd meeting. Not officially. Not in the shared files Burke controlled. My own records. Dates, statements, decisions that didn't match what ended up in the minutes. Because something else had started bothering me. The official documentation never reflected hesitation. It was like every room I sat in had a second version that got written later. Cleaner, simpler, unanimous. One afternoon, I compared my notes to the finalized meeting summary. My objections weren't just minimized. They were gone. Completely erased. I walked into Burke's office with both documents in hand. "Hey," I said, keeping it neutral. "I think there's something missing from the minutes." He didn't even look up at first. Then he took the pages, skimmed them for maybe 2 seconds, and set them aside. "No," he said calmly. "That's accurate." "I raised concerns about the maintenance delays," I replied. He finally met my eyes. "You raised questions," he corrected. "We addressed them." "That's not what, Marlowe," He said my name like a period at the end of a sentence. You're here to support the initiative, not reinterpret it. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Then I nodded. Got it. I walked out. And that was the moment something shifted. Not externally, internally. Because now I knew. This wasn't sloppiness. This was controlled, intentional. From that point on, I stopped trying to correct anything in the open. I listened. I watched. I built a different kind of map. I started paying attention to who else seemed uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Who avoided eye contact when certain decisions were made. Who double-checked things after meetings instead of during them. Security staff. Maintenance teams. Administrative assistants who had been there longer than any executive. People who saw everything and said nothing. Over the next few months, patterns became clearer. Maintenance requests getting delayed without explanation. Inspection schedules shifting at the last minute. Incidents quietly reclassified to avoid escalation. And always, numbers that looked just good enough to pass. The more I saw, the more one thing became obvious. This wasn't about saving the company. It was about surviving just long enough to cash out and leaving someone else to deal with what came after. I didn't know exactly when they decided that someone would be me. But by the time they cornered me in that garage, I knew they had. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I had stopped being unprepared a long time ago. By 4:30 the next morning, I gave up on sleep. There was no point pretending anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that garage again. Wyatt blocking one side, Burke closing the other. Both of them speaking with the confidence of men who had already written my ending. So I got up. The apartment was quiet in that hollow way only pre-dawn can be. I turned on the shower as hot as I could stand it and stayed there longer than usual, trying to force my body into calm, even when my mind refused. It didn't work, but it gave me something to do besides think. When I got dressed, I chose carefully, not because I cared how they saw me, because I cared how I felt walking into that building. Gray suit, white blouse, minimal makeup. The jade necklace my mother gave me when I graduated, the one she called my backbone stone, half joking, half serious. I fastened it with steadier hands than I expected. By the time I left, the sky was still dark and the streets were mostly empty. Rain from the night before had left the roads slick, reflecting traffic lights and storefront signs in long, blurred streaks. My resignation letter sat inside my briefcase, signed and waiting. Anyone who found it would assume it meant surrender. That was the point. I pulled into the garage a little after 6. The early shift guard was still at the front desk. Miguel. He looked up when I walked in and blinked twice, surprised. Ms. Arden? You're early. Could say the same for you, he smiled. I'm always early. That was true. It was one of the reasons I liked him. Reliable people never advertised it. They just kept showing up. I didn't use my badge. I signed the logbook by hand instead. Miguel noticed. His eyes flicked from the paper to my face. Everything all right? I paused just long enough to let the question feel real. Big morning. He nodded slowly. Need anything? You tell me. 3 months earlier, I'd helped him find an affordable tutor for his daughter when he mentioned she was falling behind in math. I hadn't done it strategically, at least not at first. But small kindnesses had a way of becoming structure later. She still liking the new school? I asked. The entire man softened. Loves it. Good. I took the elevator up alone. The executive floor looked different when it was empty. Too polished, too clean. Like a stage before actors walked on and pretended the script was spontaneous. My office stayed dark as I passed it. Instead, I headed straight for the boardroom. The door opened without resistance, exactly as promised. Lynn had already done her part. She had worked in that company longer than almost anyone still left on the executive side. People ignored women like Lynn until they needed something impossible fixed in 5 minutes. That was always their mistake. She knew everybody's habits, everybody's lies, and exactly how much trouble each person could survive. The room smelled faintly of coffee and furniture polish. I set my bag down, took out the folders, and placed one at each seat around the table, 12 in total. Every folder looked identical. Every folder contained only one thing: my business card. No explanation, no evidence packet, no argument. Just enough to unsettle the room before I even spoke. When I finished, I took out my phone and sent a single text. Board ready. Then I waited. At 7:30, the first door opened. Garland came in with 3 board members, all wearing the same expression people wear when they've been summoned early and told the matter is urgent, but not told why. Annoyance, concern, curiosity, the executive trifecta. Garland looked older than he had a year ago. Retirement was close enough now that he'd started carrying himself like a man already halfway gone. "Marlowe," he said, stopping near the head of the table. "Your message suggested immediate operational risk." "It does." His eyes moved to the folders. "And this couldn't wait?" "No, sir." One of the board members, Ellis, set her purse down slowly. "Who else is expected?" Before I could answer, the door opened again. Rosalind from legal stepped in first. Dario from security came in behind her. That got Garland's attention. He turned slightly. "I wasn't aware they were joining us." "I asked that they be included," I said. No one sat down right away after that. The room had shifted, not into panic, into caution. Then Wyatt walked in. He came through the door with his usual polish, the easy confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to him the second he entered it. That confidence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Long enough to register the board, legal, security. Long enough to realize this was not a private conversation. His smile came back quickly, but now it was effort. "Well," he said lightly, "this is an ambitious way to start a day." Burke arrived last. He stopped dead when he saw who was in the room. That reaction was smaller than Wyatt's, but worse. Wyatt could perform through almost anything. Burke needed control to function. And for one clean second, he didn't have it. "What is this?" he asked. Garland looked at me. "That's what we're here to find out." I waited until everyone had taken a seat. Then I remained standing. "Last night," I said, "Wyatt and Burke confronted me in the parking garage and told me I had until 9 this morning to resign." Silence. Not the kind that comes from confusion. The kind that lands when everyone in the room instantly understands what that sentence means, if it's true. Burke recovered first. "That is an outrageous distortion." Wyatt shook his head, almost amused. This was a personnel issue, a private conversation regarding concerns about her recent conduct. "They threatened to destroy my professional reputation if I didn't leave quietly," I said. "They also implied they had prepared documentation to tie me to financial misconduct." Rosalind leaned forward a fraction. "That's a serious allegation." "It is." Wyatt spread his hands. "And does she have any proof of that conversation?" I met his eyes. "No." He leaned back slightly. There it was, relief. He thought I had opened with my weakest point. He was right. That was intentional. "This morning isn't about the threat itself," I said. "It's about why they made it." I opened my laptop, connected it to the room display, and brought up the first slide. No dramatic headline, no emotional framing, just maintenance records. Rows, dates, equipment IDs, sign-offs. Corporate people trusted spreadsheets more than people. I had learned that years earlier. Burke folded his hands on the table. "What exactly are we looking at?" "Records presented as proof that critical systems were inspected and maintained on schedule." Garland frowned. "Presented?" "Yes, presented." I clicked to the next slide. Original service request, deferred work orders, technician schedules, then another. Incident notes that had been recoded, downgraded, or buried. "This project has not been producing efficiencies," I said. "It has been manufacturing appearance while increasing risk." Wyatt's tone sharpened. "Careful. I ignored him. Key equipment has gone without proper maintenance for months. Required inspections were delayed or skipped. Internal reporting has been altered to make compliance look intact when it isn't. Burke gave a short laugh. You're making extremely bold claims based on partial operational data you're not qualified to interpret. I'm not asking anyone here to trust my interpretation. I clicked again. A list of names appeared on the screen. Maintenance supervisors, floor technicians, compliance support staff. Several of the employees involved in these records are in a conference room down the hall and available to answer questions directly. That landed harder than anything I had shown so far, because testimony meant unpredictability, and unpredictability was poison to men like Wyatt and Burke. Wyatt sat forward. You brought staff into this? I brought witnesses. Dario shifted almost invisibly near the wall. Rosalind's expression became unreadable. Burke's voice cooled. This is reckless. No, I said. Reckless is letting the current state of those systems continue until outside inspection turns this into a shutdown. That got Garland. His attention snapped fully to me. Shut down? Yes. I let the word hang there before continuing. The inspection scheduled for tomorrow will not go well. Nobody interrupted me after that. I handed out sealed envelopes. Each one contained my private timeline of Project Revival, meeting dates, decisions, objections, changes to internal records, and the pattern I had been documenting for months. Not elegant, not polished, but detailed enough that it couldn't be dismissed with one easy laugh. Paper makes people slow down. That was why I printed it. While they opened them, I watched Burke. He didn't panic. He scanned, fast, precise, looking for weakness, not truth. This is your own version of events, he said finally, not official documentation. My version is the only one that includes what I actually said in the room. He looked up. Meeting minutes were distributed and approved. No, I said. They were distributed. That's different. Ellis's eyes lifted from the papers. Are you suggesting the records were altered after the fact? Yes. Burke snapped the folder shut. This is absurd. I turned back to the screen and brought up a summary page showing critical system status by category. Too much red. Too much yellow. Even from across the room, it looked like warning. Garland stared at it. If this is accurate. It is. Wyatt cut in, voice smooth again, trying to retake the room. This is a disgruntled employee constructing a narrative after being confronted about performance issues. I almost smiled. There it was. Predictable, efficient, familiar. Then I said the one thing they weren't ready for. I won't be here much longer anyway. Garland looked up. What? I accepted another position. My resignation is already written. It becomes effective in 2 weeks. The room changed again. This time, the silence came from genuine surprise. Wyatt blinked. Just once. But it was enough. He had been building his argument around ambition, retaliation, career maneuvering. A woman trying to climb by tearing down the people above her. If I was already leaving, that story weakened. Then why do this? Burke asked. He meant it like an attack. I answered it like it was simple. Because if I walk out and say nothing, people get hurt. Nobody spoke. For the first time all morning, nobody moved to interrupt, redirect, or soften the moment. Then Tanner, one of the board members, asked the only question that mattered. What do you recommend? I took a breath. This was the part I had rehearsed most carefully. Immediate emergency maintenance on the highest risk systems. A request to postpone the inspection for 30 days while corrections are documented. A full review of project decisions and related records, and new leadership over the initiative, effective now. Wyatt's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, and when he looked at me, there was no charm left at all. Wyatt didn't raise his voice. That would have been easier. Instead, he let a small, controlled smile settle back into place like nothing I had just said mattered. This, he said, glancing around the table, is exactly what we were concerned about. There it was, the pivot. Burke leaned forward, calmer now, more precise. We identified irregularities weeks ago. We've been addressing them internally to avoid unnecessary disruption. I felt it immediately, the shift in the room. Not belief, but doubt. And doubt was all they needed. Garland looked between us. You're saying this was already under review? Wyatt nodded. Quietly, strategically. We didn't want to alarm the board without a complete plan. Burke reached into his briefcase and pulled out a neatly bound report. He slid it across the table with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what it would do. We documented everything, he said. Ellis picked it up first. Tanner leaned in beside her. Pages turned. Silence followed. And just like that, the room tilted. I watched their eyes as they scanned it. They saw structure, dates, language that sounded careful, responsible, proactive. It was good. Too good. Wyatt sat back, letting it breathe. Marlo wasn't looped into that process, he added, almost sympathetically. Which explains the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I let that word hang there. Then I reached for the report. Burke hesitated for a fraction of a second before letting go. That was enough. I flipped it open, not reading it the way they expected, line by line, searching for meaning. I went straight to the metadata. People forget that documents tell two stories, the one you see and the one the system records. I closed the folder gently. This wasn't created 3 weeks ago. Burke didn't blink. Excuse me? The file was generated last night. Ellis looked up sharply. What? Timestamp is recent, I said. Formatting, structure, content, assembled after our conversation in the garage. Wyatt shook his head slowly, almost disappointed. You're reaching. Am I? I turned to Rosalind. You can confirm creation logs, correct? She didn't answer immediately. That pause stretched just long enough to make everyone in the room feel it. Yes, she said finally. System logs track document creation and modification. Burke exhaled through his nose. We compiled existing notes into a formal report. That's standard. Then the underlying files should reflect that timeline, I said. Separate drafts, progressive edits, not a single creation point hours after I was told to resign. The room tightened, not resolved, but unstable. Wyatt leaned forward again, this time with a sharper edge. Let's not get lost in technicalities. The issue here is behavior. He turned to Garland. She's been acting erratically, accessing files outside her scope, contacting former employees, disrupting normal operations. Burke nodded. We were concerned about her judgment. That's why we advised her to step back. The narrative was clean. Too clean. And it was working. I could see it in the way Garland's shoulders shifted, in the way Tanner stopped flipping pages and started watching me instead. They weren't convinced, but they were no longer sure. And uncertainty always favored the people who already had power. If I pushed too hard now, I would lose them. So I didn't push. I redirected. If their explanation is accurate, I said calmly, then postponing the inspection should not be an issue. Wyatt answered immediately. Of course not. Too fast. Garland caught it. Good, he said. We'll request an extension. In the meantime, I want a full internal review. Everything tied to this project. Burke nodded. That's reasonable. Also, Ellis added, no one involved leaves the building. No outside communication until this is resolved. That landed harder than anything else so far. Wyatt's jaw tightened. For the first time, control slipped. Not completely, but enough to show. Are we under investigation now? He asked. Precaution, Garland said. If everything checks out, we move on. Wyatt sat back slowly. Understood. The meeting broke, not cleanly, not with resolution, just paused. Dario began coordinating room assignments, separate spaces, no phones allowed, no contact. As I stepped into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Burke leaning in toward Wyatt, whispering something I couldn't hear. Wyatt nodded once, short, decisive. They weren't done, not even close. 2 hours passed in a blur of silence. The room they placed me in was small, windowless, deliberately neutral. A table, 2 chairs, nothing else. No clock, which meant time stretched. Every minute felt like 10. Every possible outcome played itself out in my head. If Rosalind found nothing, if the logs were wiped, altered, delayed, then everything I had brought forward would collapse into speculation. And speculation doesn't beat authority. The door opened. Dario stood there. "They need you." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. When I walked back into the main conference room, the energy was different. Heavier, more contained. Garland sat at the head again, but now there were 2 additional people in the room. One I recognized immediately. The safety inspector. Early. Too early. The other, I didn't recognize her, but she wasn't corporate. You can tell. The way she stood. The way she watched instead of reacting. The way she said nothing while everyone else adjusted their posture around her presence. Garland gestured to the empty seat. "Sit." I did. No one spoke for a moment. Then Garland exhaled slowly. "We've reviewed the materials. Both sides." Both sides. That phrasing mattered. "Maintenance delays are real," he continued. "Compliance issues exist. Documentation discrepancies have been confirmed." Wyatt didn't react. Burke didn't move. They had already calculated this outcome. Partial acknowledgement, containment, reframe. Burke leaned forward. "As senior leadership, we accept responsibility for oversight failures." Clearly, communication broke down. There it was. Not denial, absorption. Take the hit, just enough to stay in control. Wyatt followed smoothly. "We've already begun corrective measures. We'll handle this internally and ensure everything is resolved before inspection." The inspector said nothing, just watched. Garland nodded slowly. "Project Revival is paused. Immediate corrective action will begin. Inspection delayed." Then he turned to me. "And you." I felt it before he finished the sentence. The shift. The direction this was going. "Given your resignation," he said, "and the complexity of the situation, we've decided to process it effective immediately. Full severance." For a second, I didn't hear anything else. Just the word. Immediately. Wyatt's eyes found mine, and this time he didn't bother hiding the satisfaction. They had done it, contained the damage, reframed the narrative, kept their positions, and removed me. Clean, efficient, exactly how they planned it. I nodded once. "I understand." My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Maybe because some part of me had already prepared for this outcome. Then the woman I didn't recognize finally spoke. "Actually," she said, stepping forward slightly, "I'd like to address something before we conclude." Every head turned. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice, just let the room adjust to her presence. "My name is Teresa Lynn," she said. "Assistant District Attorney, White Collar Division." The silence that followed wasn't like the others. This one had weight, real weight, because suddenly this wasn't internal anymore. Wyatt blinked, just once. Burke's fingers tightened slightly on the table. Teresa continued, calm and precise. "I've been reviewing certain materials related to this case. Based on what I've seen and what I've heard this morning, I'm opening a formal investigation." The word hung in the air. Investigation. And for the first time since the parking garage, they didn't have control. An investigation? Wyatt was the first to say it out loud, but the disbelief wasn't just his. You could feel it ripple across the table. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Not in a room like this. Not with people like them. Corporate problems stayed internal, managed, contained, quietly buried under policy and phrasing. Teresa didn't react to his tone. She simply met his eyes. Yes. Burke leaned forward, careful again, choosing each word. There's no basis for that. We've already acknowledged procedural issues. We're addressing them. Procedural issues, Teresa repeated, almost like she was testing the phrase. Is that what you're calling falsified safety records? Burke didn't answer immediately. He shifted tactics instead. Any discrepancies are administrative, nothing intentional. Teresa's expression didn't change. You're sure you want to characterize it that way? Wyatt cut in. This is a corporate matter. You're overstepping. No, she said calmly. This becomes my jurisdiction the moment those decisions put people at risk, and documentation is altered to hide it. That was the line. The one that separated everything that came before from everything that would follow. The room didn't feel corporate anymore. It felt exposed. Burke's composure started to fracture, not dramatically, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. You're basing this on what exactly? Teresa turned slightly, not toward him, toward me. That was the moment, the one I had been holding back. I reached into my bag and placed a small black device on the table. It didn't look like much. That was the point. Wyatt stared at it. What is that? My third option, I said. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Teresa picked it up, almost casually. Audio recordings, she said. Multiple conversations over several months. Wyatt's voice dropped. You recorded us? I documented what was happening, I replied. That's illegal, Burke snapped. Teresa shook her head. Not under these circumstances, not when there's reasonable suspicion of criminal conduct. Burke's eyes flicked to Wyatt. For the first time all day, they weren't aligned. Not perfectly. Wyatt recovered faster. Even if that's true, context matters. Conversations can be misinterpreted. Of course, Teresa said. Which is why we don't rely on a single source. She turned back to the table. We also have system logs showing document alterations, testimony from staff instructed to bypass required procedures, financial records that don't match reported expenditures. Each piece landed heavier than the last, not because they were surprising, because they were layered. Burke's voice came out lower now. This is a misunderstanding. No, Teresa said. This is a pattern. Silence followed. Then Wyatt stood up. Not fast, not aggressive, just done. I want legal representation. Teresa nodded. You'll need it. The shift was immediate after that. Not emotional, structural. Dario moved without being told. Security began collecting devices, laptops, phones, anything tied to internal systems. No one protested, because protesting would have meant acknowledging control was gone. The inspector finally spoke, quiet but firm. We'll need full access to maintenance records moving forward. Garland nodded, slower than before. You'll have it. No one looked at Wyatt and Burke anymore. Not directly. They were still in the room, but they were already separate. I watched it happen in real time. The exact same distance they had created around others for years, now closing in around them. Burke leaned toward Wyatt, whispering something urgent. Wyatt didn't respond. He was staring at the device still sitting on the table, like it had rewritten something fundamental in his understanding of how the world worked. A few hours later, they were escorted out. No handcuffs, no raised voices. Just two men walking down the same hallway they had controlled for years, without anyone stepping aside for them. The building felt different after that. Not lighter, just honest. I went back to my office and started packing. Nothing dramatic, just the usual things people collect without noticing. A few books, a mug, papers I didn't need anymore. I was halfway through when I heard someone at the door. Garland. He didn't step inside right away, just stood there, watching. "You planned all of this," he said finally. It wasn't a question. I kept packing. "I prepared." He nodded slowly. "You built connections, gathered evidence, waited." "Yes." He hesitated. "Why not come to me sooner?" I looked up. Really looked at him. "Would you have believed me?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That silence said everything. He stepped into the room then, slower. "We're going to need someone to fix what's left of that project." I closed the box. "I won't be here." He studied me for a moment. "You're sure about that?" "Yes." Because staying would mean playing the same game. And I was done with that. As I walked out later, carrying the box toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Teresa. "They're already turning on each other," she said. I paused. "How long?" I asked. "Months, maybe, but it's over for them." I ended the call and stood there for a second, longer than I needed to. Then I headed toward the garage. Same place it started, but this time, it wasn't quiet because I was alone. It was quiet because something had finally been broken. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time that day, there was no one watching me. No board members, no executives, no one measuring my words or waiting for me to slip. Just silence. I stood there with the box in my hands, staring at my reflection in the metal panel. Same suit, same face, same person who had walked into that building hours earlier. But not the same position, not the same game. By the time I stepped back into the parking garage, the light had shifted. Late afternoon now. Cars pulling out, engines starting. People heading home to lives that had no idea how close things had come to going very wrong. I walked past the spot where Wyatt had blocked my door the night before. For a second, I stopped. Same concrete, same shadows, different outcome. My phone buzzed again, messages stacking up, names I recognized, people who had heard versions of the story already spreading through the building. I didn't open them. Not yet. I set the box in my trunk and closed it gently, like I wasn't in a rush anymore. Because I wasn't. For months, everything had been tension, watching, waiting, measuring every move, every word, every silence. Now there was nothing to track, nothing to prove, just space. I got into the car but didn't start it right away. Instead, I leaned back and let the quiet settle in. Teresa had been right. They didn't go down fighting together. They turned on each other the moment it mattered. People like Wyatt and Burke always believed they were untouchable, until the moment they realized they were standing alone. And by then, it was too late. Garland had offered me a reason to stay, a title, control, the chance to fix what they had broken. A version of me 6 months ago might have taken it, but that version of me still believed the system could be corrected from the inside without a cost. Now I knew better. Some places don't need better players. They need different rules. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the garage, I caught one last glimpse of the building in my rearview mirror. It looked exactly the same. That was the strange part. From the outside, nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. I drove for a while without turning on the radio, just the sound of the road and the city moving around me. No pressure. No performance, just movement. If you had asked me before all of this what winning looked like, I probably would have said something louder. A promotion, recognition, being proven right in a room full of people. But sitting there, hands on the wheel, heading toward a future that didn't include any of them, winning felt a lot quieter than that. It felt like walking away with nothing left to hide. If you were in my position, would you have fought them sooner? Or waited until they defeated themselves?